Hi everybody, Miss Greta here today, and I have a little friend for you to meet today. We are going to start talking a little bit about water. Everything needs water. Water is so important, right? All living things need water. And especially this little guy. This is Fred the fish. Everybody say hi, Fred. Hi, Fred the fish. And Fred lives in a protected wilderness area. What that means is that Fred lives in an area where people are not allowed to fish, so Fred is very safe. He lives in an area where people are not allowed to hunt the animals or to throw down litter, so the area is kept very clean. It is monitored probably by our park service. So what does Fred's water look like in the river where Fred lives? It's very clean, isn't it? Do you think Fred is a happy fish? I think so. I think he's quite happy. However, one day, Fred gets curious, and Fred decides to swim downstream, and he leaves the protected wilderness area. Fred's swimming on downstream, and the first thing that Fred comes across is some farm country. Well, we know a lot about farm country around here, don't we? And it so happens that there by this farm that's next to the river, the farmer has been out there tilling up the soil. He's getting ready to plant some crops. And when it rains, guess what happens to some of that soil? Some of that soil washes down and it gets into the river, and some of that soil or dirt, it gets on Fred. How is Fred now? Is Fred happy? He's okay. He's just a little bit dirty, right? It's just soil and it probably washes off. Fred keeps swimming. He swims on downstream. How's Fred's water look? It's a little muddy, isn't it? But not too bad. Just a little muddy. Well, Fred keeps swimming. He swims down past the farm. He swims on further downstream. And the next thing you know, near the edge of town as Fred is coming in, on this riverbank down here, there's a housing development. So that's a place where they've built lots of houses. There might be an apartment complex or something there, okay? And near these apartment complexes and housing developments, they want to make sure that the grass is growing really green and looks nice, so people want to move in and have nice looking yards. However, in order to do that, they sometimes use other substances, and this maintenance man here has been using fertilizer. He's been using fertilizer on the plants and the grass to help it grow. And when it washes down after it rains, guess what? That fertilizer, it gets into the river, doesn't it? It washes down into the river. And while fertilizer can be good for our grass and flowers and plants when we're helping them to grow, it doesn't really belong in the river, does it? And it gets down there in the river and it makes those plants that are in the river and near the water grow too fast. There's too many of them. There's not enough oxygen for them to grow. So not only are they taking some of Fred's oxygen, and it's kind of hard for Fred to breathe, also the plants can't live that way. They grow too fast and they die. And as they rot, they're taking up more of that oxygen. They rot and they die in the river. Oh, now how is Fred? Not so good. It's harder for Fred to breathe, isn't it? He's a little bit dirty there, isn't he? But he's a tough little fish, so he keeps swimming. He swims on further down. He comes all the way into town now. And in the middle of town here, where Fred is, there is a big shopping mall. And the shopping mall's parking lot is down near the riverbank. Yes, the parking lot is. And when we have a parking lot, we're going to have a lot of cars, right? Those cars park there. And guess what? Some of those cars sometimes leak oil. Do you ever see a shiny puddle after it rains and it has all those little rainbow colors and it looks really pretty? It's actually oil. And it's really not good for the environment. So when it rains, that oil washes down into the river. Oh, and some of it gets on Fred. Oh, poor Fred. How is Fred now? He's got oil on him. Fred did not want the oil on him, did he? Fred swims on. He swims on down further. He's trying to wash the oil off, but it didn't wash off as easily as the soil, as the dirt did. So Fred is swimming a little bit slower now, isn't he? Poor Fred. But he keeps moving. Fred swims on further downstream. He keeps swimming. And now, where Fred is, it's a little bit later in the year than it is here. It's getting close to winter time, and there is a cold spell. And when this cold spell happens after all that rain, guess what the water does on the roads? It freezes. And what happens when the water freezes and there's ice on the road? They salt the roads, don't they? We need those salt trucks to come out and salt the roads where they can, because that way it makes it safer for us to drive to school and to work. But then it warms up again and it rains again. And guess what happens? All that salt on the road, it doesn't disappear. Nope, it washes down with the rain into the water. And it gets in Fred's water. And now, while some fish like salt water in the ocean, and they're happy about it, Fred is not a saltwater fish. No, no, no. He's a freshwater fish. He does not like salt. It is not good for Fred. Fred is swimming a lot slower now. And it's pretty hard for Fred to breathe. Look at Fred's water. How does Fred's water look? It looks pretty yucky, doesn't it? Would you want to swim in that water? I would not. But Fred keeps moving. He swims on further downstream. And down this part of town where Fred is now, there's the city park. And there have been folks picnicking in the park now that it warmed back up and it was a nice day. They ate their food there in the park and they had a good time. But when they left, guess what? They forgot to clean up their mess. They left behind some trash. And when the wind blew, guess where that trash went? That litter ended up in Fred's water, into the river, and some of it got on Fred. Now how is Fred? Fred is not so good, is he? Look at Fred's water. So Fred keeps swimming though. He's a tough fish. He moves on further downstream, swimming slower now, but he keeps on going. Now, Fred comes toward the end of town. This is where the wastewater treatment plant is. A wastewater treatment plant is the place that cleans the water. For those of us that have what we call city water, when they provide water for us, they have to make sure that it's clean, that it doesn't have any bad germs in it. So they have a special factory that cleans this water before they pump it out to us in our sinks, for the folks that have city water, right? So the wastewater treatment plant is there. Now in a wastewater treatment plant, they're taking that same water that has gone down our drains, down our bathtub, even down our toilet, and they're cleaning it and filtering it again so that we can use it again. Because as we said, water is a very important special resource, right? And we have to find ways to clean it and reuse it as much as we can. So that means that all that water has to get cleaned, every bit of it, even the stuff that comes down the toilet. Well, they don't know it, but in this wastewater treatment plant, one of the turbines that pushes out the gray water is broken and it is leaking. So that gray water, the stuff that goes down our drains and down our toilets, is leaking out. Ooh, yuck. And guess where it ends up? Down in the river. Ooh, yuck. And some of it gets on Fred. Oh no. Poor Fred. Now look at Fred's water. What does Fred's water look like now? How do you think Fred is doing now? Oh no. But Fred keeps swimming. He swims on further downstream. He keeps on moving. He's moving really slowly now. Fred is pretty sick. He's not doing well at all. The gray water from the wastewater treatment plant was not good for Fred. He's pretty sick. But he keeps going. Well, just past the wastewater treatment plant, Fred swims down, and this part of the riverbank is near the industrial park. That's where all the factories are. And now factories have ordinances in place, okay? These are laws that are rules and regulations that say that they're not allowed to pollute. It's illegal for them to pollute. The laws say it's illegal for them to pollute, but they have special ordinances sometimes that they get that says that even though it's illegal for them to pollute, it's okay for them to do it maybe a little bit. So, for example, here in East Tennessee, we live downstream from a big paper company over across the border in North Carolina. And for many, many years, that paper company was allowed to pollute, put out chemicals from their paper product making into the Pigeon River, which then flowed downstream to East Tennessee, here where we live, all the way right through Newport. The Pigeon River is the river that flows right downtown in the middle of the city of Newport. If you've ever been to the River Walk, that river is the Pigeon River. And it's a lot better today. It's not as bad as it was. But many years ago, that Pigeon River was full of pollution. Some days it would be so bad that you could smell it. It would smell stinky and rotten. Some days it would be so bad that you could see it. You would see foam and filth on the tops of the water. It was terrible. Because that factory, even though it's illegal for them to pollute, had an ordinance in place, a variance in place that said that they could pollute. And this factory that Fred is going by, it has one of those variances that says that it's okay for them to pollute a little bit. And they're using that water in the river and they're putting it back with chemicals in the water. And those chemicals are in the river and they get on Fred. Oh no, now how is Fred? Fred is moving really slowly, isn't he? Fred is just barely swimming. He's really sick and it's very hard for Fred to breathe. Poor Fred. Look at Fred's water. Ooh, yuck. Would you want to swim in that water? I would not. Would you drink that water? Ooh, yuck. No way. Fred keeps moving. He's moving really slowly now because he's very sick. And it's really hard for Fred to breathe. He swims down, and poor Fred, you won't believe his luck. Poor Fred comes out of town. Out of there, past the buildings, and he gets downstream, downriver. And now Fred comes across an area where there is a hazardous waste dump site. I know y'all have probably seen on TV and the movies where people wear those big yellow suits with the gloves. They call them hazmat suits. They're hazardous material suits to protect people because there's chemicals that are so bad that we can't even breathe them. We can't even touch them or they could hurt us or make us sick. Now, when we're done with those chemicals, they don't just disappear, do they? No, they have to go somewhere. So they put them in barrels, and sometimes they'll even bury them or they'll store them in locations. They try to put them away from people so they're not making people sick or hurting people. But these hazardous materials don't just disappear. We have to put them somewhere. So we put them in hazardous waste sites, right? And they've been stored in barrels in this particular hazardous waste site, but it's really old. It's been a long time that they've been sitting there. And over time, one of these barrels has gotten rusty and gotten a hole in it and started to leak. And those hazardous materials, you guessed it, are leaking down into the river. When it rains, those wash down because they don't disappear, do they? And it's in the river and it gets on Fred. Oh no, now how is Fred? It was hazardous materials. Fred is not okay. Nobody can live with hazardous materials on them. So now Fred is dead. Poor Fred is dead. Now, good thing that Fred the fish is really just a sponge, isn't he? He's not a real fish. And we would rinse Fred out and he would live again to tell the Fred the fish story another day because he's just a sponge. And even though this story had lots of different pollutants in it, right? Pollution, just like we said, anything can become litter when it gets where it doesn't belong. It's trash that it gets where it doesn't belong. Anything can become pollution when it gets where it doesn't belong. Our soil from our farmers, that soil is great for the plants and crops. They need that, right? But when we get too much soil in the water where it doesn't belong, it becomes pollution, doesn't it? All of those things become pollution. And while Fred encountered a lot of different pollutants on his sad journey, it might seem kind of dramatic and far-fetched, but the truth is that there are those exact pollutants somewhere in our water system all the time, and that there are fish that are living with those pollutants and that are even dying because of those pollutants out in our water all the time. So the thing that I want you to remember about Fred the fish is, just like anything can become trash when it gets in the wrong place, anything can become pollution when it gets in our water and it doesn't belong. So we need to be very mindful, and we need to farm responsibly to make sure that our soil runoff isn't polluting too much of our watershed. We need to make sure that if we're using fertilizers or pesticides or anything of that nature, that it's not washing down and getting into our waters. And we need to make sure that we're holding our businesses accountable, our factories, our industries, to make sure that they are producing materials and going about their business in a way that is going to be safe for our environment, to make sure that we are holding those factories accountable to the laws and not allowing variances for them to be able to pollute into our rivers. And also to make sure that we're not littering. That family that picnicked at the park, they had a great day, and they probably didn't mean for the trash to end up in the river, but because they forgot it and left it behind, when the wind blew, it went down and got into the river, didn't it? Okay, so the thing I want you to remember, I'm sorry I had to share such a sad story with you today, but the thing that I want you to remember is that just like it's important that we're being mindful and aware of all of our belongings and our activities when we're out there so that we're not littering, we also need to be thinking about our water. Our streams, our creeks, our rivers, our lakes, our ponds, our oceans, and everything that we do by or near any bodies of water, to make sure that we're not putting anything in our water that doesn't belong, that could hurt our fish. Okay? Thank you all for listening, and I hope to talk to you again very soon. Okay? Bye.